Hey, good day, everyone. Okay, I happen to be from that area. One. Secondly, I happen to be a civil engineer. Two. I am familiar with the area. I have had reason to move out of the area because of traffic congestions. I have lived at Cuba for a while. Every weekend, let me finish saying, every weekend, I am in Mondesi and in Pinal. Good? So I know what the problems are. I was born and I grew up in that area. Good. I want to make a couple points about the environment. Why are we hearing about environmental concerns on this particular leg, and not only the entire leg, you know, a small portion of that leg, which is closer today, when the alternative that supports the Mosquito Creek development has bigger environmental concerns that's not being raised, conveniently. Secondly, you have a lot of virgin land that is being bulldozed to get from Golconda to Davie. Nobody's raising those environmental concerns, conveniently. I am suggesting that there's a lot of red herrings being brought up because of relocation issues. Now, I want to say, for the people who are directly affected with respect to relocation, my heart goes out to you. If I were in your shoes, I would feel the hurt and the pain, especially if we talk about very older, our parents, grandparents. I understand that. I have an 80-year-old mother in Pinal myself. The point I want to make is, the people who are raising these issues to stop. Now, listen, it is not to resolve the problems, you know. It is to stop the highway. We are not talking, listen. The people who are raising these issues to stop this highway actually are benefiting from the Golconda to Davie. They stand to benefit, but they do not want other people to benefit after Davie. I think that's selfish. The next thing I want to say, this is short flooding. Okay? Any man-made or natural disaster could eventually be dealt with by engineering design. Okay? If we do not have the expertise, we can get the expertise from abroad, as we are seeing right now at the Uriah Butler interchange. If we do not have the experience, we can get it. The beef I have here, and let me tell you, I mean, this is not a personal issue. Dr. Kublal Singh and I happen to be classmates, right? It's not a personal issue. The problem I'm having is we are not talking about solutions. We are talking about stopping the highway. And I feel that is immoral. It is selfish because you are benefiting from a leg, but you do not want other people who have to suffer in that traffic every day of their life to benefit from the extension. I want to say that the traffic congestion, all the issues on that, the Pinal, Davie, and Sapari and so on, can only be solved by a highway that will access these towns just like the Ho Choi, bypasses the central city centers, connecting them and providing access. The reason why we here today and didn't spend 6 hours in traffic was because of the Ho Choi highway. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Shiraz Khan. You know, there is a number of things that when Ms. Maharaj just spoke and talk about people do things because of political, you know, inclination, I could have just understand why we are the previous speaker. Yes. Now, I have a document here, and we have all the research websites that we went on. I have it here, and people have done numerous research on what it costs to build a highway in the world. Now, I have this document here. I don't have money. I'm not being financed by nobody, so I could only make 2 copies and bring here. One for me, I want to give all of the share. Right? Here's something. Puerto Rico, it costs $3,325,000 to build a mile a highway. In Russia, $10,500,000 to build a mile. Trinidad and Tobago, Point Fortin, $57 million. Look at here. Anybody who have eyes could see. You understand? This is what we have here in Trinidad and Tobago. Hello, excuse me. I'm not paid to come here.
All right, okay.
Right?
Yeah, take your point.
Yeah. So the thing about it is that we have this cost here, and people are complaining about other things, and this is black and white people that we can see for ourselves and understand what it is going on here. The other thing, my dear brothers and sisters, we just had a serious set of flooding in Diego Martin. Yours truly, in 2008, we complained about the bulldozing of the Fort George lands for housing. The then minister said, development is a criteria for growth in a country. You all see what the environment has complained about what was taking place in the Northern Range. Look at how people's houses was washed away, and environmentalists and people complain, university students complain about what was taking place in the Northern Range. Today we see the disaster of it. Do we wait in penal to see the further disaster of what is taking place because of people's petty need for growth in terms of their pocket, not the nation? Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. A more general question concerning the government's responsibility to get buy-in from the population and the communities that will be affected in general. We spoke about earlier having an issue with development and creating an anti-development sentiment within the country. So I'd like to know, what is the government's responsibility to get buy-in for certain development projects? Do they need to give us feasibility studies, cost benefit for every single program, or for programs above a certain dollar value? In what way can we as a population be involved in being convinced that this is the way to develop our nation? Because in absence of that is what you see here, people will be protesting because there's no way to be actively involved in the decision making of these plans. So is there a way that the government could get buy-in for certain projects without having protest action, or is it the opposition perhaps supposed to be raising some of these issues? How is it working right now, and how can it work better?
That's better. Thank you. I'm very taken with what Ms. Maharaj is recommending about the value of information, and also if we tie that in with what Dr. Sweet is saying, which is the need for a scientific approach. They both are perhaps in the same ballpark. And my questions are framed around that, particularly since the National Physical Infrastructure Development Plan, or whatever it's called, seems to me more of an engineering document that pays scant regard to ecological needs, the ecological dimensions of environment. And therefore, it is more a blueprint for building and engineering than it is in terms of the wider needs of the society. The first question, what land do we have? How much do we have? That is, what is our man-land ratio and the carrying capacity of our environment or living space? And that's a pretty wide question. And it leads to the next one. How do we make decisions on land use? For example, even if you're building a highway or a house or whatever. Do the town and country planning, EMA, Ministry of Agriculture, and all other government bodies and institutions have a framework, a land classification system to follow? That could be quite simple. Jeez. Thank you. Related to this, why is 70% of our population squatters? What has caused this? Are we not a country with a serious problem around the competition for land, the price of land, and also, third question, why is the Minister of Finance, and before him, or ex-Prime Minister Manning, looking to Guyana to produce our food when the Caroni lands and other land left idle or unaccounted for in our thinking and planning? We seem to be functioning on a basis where we create excitement, drama. Maybe in a small country we need that. I like it too. Bacchanal. And in that is lost any tendency for what Bess tried to ask us to do, which is discourse. Discourse based on reason, on respect, and a need to find better truths. We cannot survive here without looking for better truths. I see ourselves at an incredible crossroads. While we here sit and deal with our own financial crises and other crises, we are unaware of the extent of the danger we are placing ourselves because we cannot put our heads together and around our problems. That must be based on information. Information is very slow to get, very difficult to get. And we're often making decisions without that information base. Thank you.
Two short points. One, we have seen a lot of conflict between agriculturalists and those who want to build houses. And all I say to them is that all of Trinidad and Tobago once was allocated to agriculture. And therefore, every time we want to build a school, a playing facility, any stuff, we're going to have to take agricultural land. And that is why we need a national physical development plan. The last gentleman said that the physical development plan possibly about engineering. In fact, it was designed by planners, not engineers. And it would be instructive if we could be informed in our discussion as to what it contains. It contains, first, classification, documentation of a lot of facilities that we have. How much wetlands, exactly all the questions we ask. So I'm saying it's important, and this is why the law required that the National Physical Development Plan be brought to Parliament and debated, and that it be renewed every 5 years in law to exactly guide development, that we don't have spontaneous movement.
My name is Auditorium, and as usual, I represent the constituency of Ramsham. I think we needed a Ramsham perspective here in this audience here. Actually, I hustled here from Coquet in San Fernando because I saw the kind of people who were in this panel. Patrick, who used to be around the corner in San Fernando there. Peter, who's been Faisabad and around, he still goes around in sports. And of course, Winston, who is a Princess Town boy. I didn't realize you were a point boy.
I only talk there.
All right, okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. What I'd like to say is that why a bit from here, I see Sunity Maharaj here, and I do recall that last week or the week before, and she made a point, and it was followed up by some people in the audience. From then on, to my mind, the matter took off. Like that was a tipping point. Because from then on, the newspapers and the radios and the television have been flooded with that so much so the Prime Minister was able to say that this morning, whatever morning it was, there were 17 articles in the newspaper about it. So I think this is what is happening. Because, Mr. Chairman, my taking of it as a Ramsham person is there's been a lot of uninformation, disinformation, misinformation, planted information, and manipulated information about this whole thing. And people cannot understand it and do not really know what decision to come to. And then you have people who want to bully us and ram it down our throat. Now, Mr. Chairman, quickly, I would think that this thing is not really just a Winkublasing thing. It's not a thing of Hindu women in Devi making some noises and supporting him. It is not just a road to point. It is not merely just people, yes, obscurantism and anti-progress. This is really, to my mind, a land use, transportation, economic plan for a significant area of Trinidad, the southwest region, they like to call it the peninsula. And nowhere do we get a take on the features, what we are talking about, the physical features, the infrastructure, the development, the community development, and of course, because Peter is here, I will say this much, for people north of the Superior River, people who do not understand what it is in an oil operation area with wells, dry wells, and all that come from that, lines and so on. I will leave it like that. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
Good morning. This discussion is one of those classical
development versus the environment debate. And I use environment in its wider context, and not just people who are involved in the environmental movement, people who are concerned generally with the whole environment. And I say it's a classical debate because we are concerned on the one hand about moving our country forward, the development which takes place in the country. But development has to take place within the context where there will be impacts on the environment. And that is why it's for this reason then that the whole issue of environmental impact assessment became popular. Now I've been involved in the environmental or doing EIAs or working with EIAs for quite some time. In fact, the very first training workshop that was organized in the Caribbean to train people in doing EIAs, I was involved in running that workshop. So I know, and I've been involved in quite a bit of EIAs and so on. The reason why the Environmental Management Authority was set up is to help to facilitate that whole developmental process. So it means that when we have discussions such as this, or even on any development project, the EMA must play a very pivotal role. But if the EMA abdicates its role and responsibility for whatever reason, then that whole development process becomes flawed. Now, how does the EMA abdicate? It abdicates because governments after governments, and not just this government, all governments, previous governments and so on, they try their best, right? And I'm saying that, without any kind of apology, they try their best to subvert the process because they don't want, the first issue is that it's going to hold back the development, it's going to prolong the development, or if they make decisions, and they sit out of ignorance, it may hold back the development or not in the way in which they want it done. What I'll tell you here is that EIAs are very valuable in that whole process, and most times, if not all times, you end up getting a much better project than when you started off. So speaking as an environmentalist, I can tell you that we are very much supportive of development, but what we say is that development must take place within a particular context. And I do agree with Professor Sweet. The project that's being considered, when the little that I have looked at and said about it and so on, I think that the problems could be solved when you bring together some of the best engineering minds and so on. But the thing is that it has to take place within a discussion that is devoid of all the emotions, right? So let's not focus on Kubla Singh. Kubla Singh is important here because he was able to bring that whole issue to the attention of the public. And it was brought to the attention of the public because information, and it's typical of how the EMA does business. So when a project like this would have first been brought to the national attention, the EMA would have asked for a public consultation, but these consultations would have been taking place down in the South, as though this is a project that's of only interest to people in the South. So we are only hearing about it up in the North, only because it was brought to our attention by people like Dr. Kubla Singh. So from that standpoint, we only need to involve him only because he brought the whole thing to the attention of the general public. So if we need to talk about what is important at this stage, I think it's a review. And why I say it's a review is because when you look at the way in which the EMA makes decision, and as Professor Sweet said again, if it is a design-build project, that means then that the EIA could not have been done at a time on the project when it was most important, and that is at the design stage. What we have now is a feasibility study, and from everything I've heard there, what we have now is a feasibility study, and that feasibility study will just give you some outlines of where it would go, and done basic studies, but the deep, in-depth studies that are required to really inform the decision whether or not you have alternatives, whether or not how it's going to impact, what's the cost of those things, these things would not have been done. So I think a review, again, is very important, and is glad that the government has agreed to do that kind of review. And what I'll say in final is that a lot of projects that I've been associated with, we have raised issues of review, and every time a review was done, we were able to point out to them some serious flaws in those projects of which the project benefited from. So it's not something that I want to be afraid of, especially when the information has been kept under lock and key for so long. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good day to everyone. First of all, just congratulate Professor Watson and SALISES for this activity. I really think it's long overdue. I made a criticism earlier publicly that really the academies have failed this country because we ought not simply be having a debate on this now, 20 days into a hunger strike. We really ought to have had academics intervening in this issue months ago when it first became highly contentious, and to provide independent research on all of these matters that we're discussing months ago. And I think that that is one of the weaknesses of the academies. The point that Vishal made about the misinformation and lack of information is absolutely correct. We continue to say the highway. Now, our concept of highways in Trinidad and Tobago, we really have two. One east-west, Churchill Roosevelt, one north-south, Uriah Butler from Mount Hope to Chaguanas, continuing as changed name, but same highway. Solomon Ho-Choi from Chaguanas now to Golconda. What is on the map there is two highways, and we don't have that concept. And so people have been continuously told, you're opposed to the highway. Now the reroute movement is not opposed to the San Fernando to Point Fortin highway. And until we define things, language is vitally important in terms of understanding. And until we all say that the reality is that for a section, there are two highways, then at Mont Desir, there's one from Mont Desir to Point Fortin. And we have to be clear about what that is, because the public's concept of highway is one east-west, one north-south. Now, the reason why I'm saying that, the gentleman said that he now lives in Couva. Now, the point is that people in Couva, in Claxton Bay, all along the old Southern Main Road, along the main population centers, I live in Prasad, so along the main population centers, don't have a highway. They have to link from their main population centers through other roads, secondary roads, to the highway, which is the debate that needs to take place. Is there, or are there alternative routes linking the main population centers between Faizabad and Dede to the highway, which is what was first planned? And Peter, the reality is that the first plan, from my understanding, was, or did not, the other way around, did not include Dede to Mont Desir. That came later on, right? If you go back to the original thing from 80s and so on, and if I'm wrong, please say so. Put it out there in the public domain from day one of the planning. What did the highway look like? And I think that is important for us. And what came thereafter, because I was told informally by a person who is very much involved in the process and so on, that if we are spending all this money, let us do both one time, right? So I wanted to make that point. Now, the second point I want to make is the issue of development. I heard the Prime Minister talk last night about the development of the Southwest Peninsula. 20 billion or 19 billion TT dollars is projected. Of course, these are things that governments trot out all the time. So we have a plant, another plant in Union Estate to be built, and Trinidad doing exploration and production work, and so on, so on, so on. As if there's a link between the highway and those plants. Not true. Not true. Because LNG was built without a highway. Point Lisas was built without a highway, and so on, and so on, and so on. UBOT put down a refinery probably without roads, and so on, in 1913. So we have to be clear and disengage development around the energy sector as being centrally linked to the construction of Dede to Mont Desir, right? And we cannot try to link the two. The third point I want to make. My last point. Yes, very, very quickly. Well, all right, two other very quick points. One, nobody is talking about the cost of lost oil production as a result of capping oil wells, quite apart from the recurrent expenditure of taking lines out of service and so on and so on. But there's a loss in oil production that will take place. And then, Winston, you made the point very correctly about the National Physical Development Plan. I was one who helped to contribute to making sure that got into the manifesto. But you yourself, in a sense, have posed the dilemma or the dichotomy. How did this highway become central priority in the absence of a National Physical Development Plan? What is therefore driving policy for this particular highway from Dede to Mont Desir? In other words, to my mind, if there was a National Physical Development Plan, then one of the things emerging from that would be highway. But we are saying highway first, National Physical Development Plan. So we are putting the cart before the horse. And very lastly, with respect to process, somebody raised the question of protesters. let me just say that in the absence of people who take positions, Sunity was correct, in the absence of people who take positions in what they believe in, then what we get is the absolute abuse of power. And if that is what we want in society, then.
David, I have a letter here from somebody who used to work with town and country planning, who said to me, the development of a highway along this alignment was proposed in the National Physical Development Plan, which was approved by Parliament decades ago. So it was there. I am not in a position to argue without data, but I wanted to raise a question that nobody else has raised, and that is the review. The review that is now beginning, it may not have authority, as somebody said. I mean, they can't impose something, but 2 points come out of the review. If the review states that the government proposed alignment is the best and should go ahead, is that review accepted by people who are anti that route? 2, but having asked for the review, and 2, if the review says run it through the old usine St. Madeleine, and that's an oil field too, incidentally, I drill wells there, to the creek, and I'm opposed, I said earlier, to expanding the creek. I think that is running a road through the swamp. Then will the government accept it? So you have a review that may go out in a vacuum, and nobody will know what to do with it. I think the environmentally sacrosanct places in this country are inside the hearts of our lagoons. We built a road skirting the Caroni Swamp. We built a road through the Beetham Swamp. And we have survived those roads, and we should have learned something about them. The swamps, Caroni, Orapooch, Nariva, I believe we owe a world duty to keep those places. And in disagreeing with Winston on this one, I believe that the North Coast Forest between Blanchisseuse and Matelot should be declared an international site of preservation. But we have to do something about making towns like Matelot and Grand Riviere totally sustainable with communications, although they may be far away, that we need to do something for them. So there's a lot of things to do with development and non-development. And yes, we must protest. When things are wrong, we should protest. If we think they're wrong, we should protest. I was in that already. But how we protest, I detest calls for violence in protest and the insulting of people whom we are protesting against. I think I never did that. Thank you.
Just clarify some points that Mr. O'Connor made. I believe the original highway which they were building to Point Fortin was conceptualized when there was a refinery down in Point Fortin. And the route for that highway wasn't through Debe, Pinal, San Francisco to Mondesi. The route was actually along the southern main road over here, widening the southern main road, but linking the current highway at some point to this highway over here. I believe it was essentially to go through here and connect over here, go down. That was the original plan, but I'm very certain of this, that it was never any way to link to Debe, to Mondesi, all these other parts. That's one point. There's another point is, someone had raised a question with highway, and they tried to link highway with road efficiency and transport efficiency. We have highways linking and development. We have highways going from Port of Spain to well east. We have highways from Grand Bazaar, a highway from Grand Bazaar going down all the way to Golconda. How, for example, from Grand Bazaar to Golconda, how much development have you all seen along that highway? Shugwanas existed before the highway was built. They passed a highway through the middle of Shugwanas. Did that solve the traffic problem in Shugwanas? No. You see, people never studied the root cause of traffic and tried to study the problem and tried to develop a solution around it. They thought a highway would have solved that problem. It never did. Anywhere along that highway other than Shugwanas, is there development along that highway? People would say Point Lisa's industrial estate, but Cuba existed, and Cuba was a vibrant town before the highway, you know. And when the highway passed, the business people within Couva suffered as a result because it took commuters away from Couva, right? The only reason Couva survived was because of the industrial estate at Panellists. Now, a highway didn't really solve the problem over there, you know, or brought any development to that area, because it was only recently that they made an interchange to link that area into the highway. That area survived all these years and decades without a highway. So to link highway with development, look at, for example, the whole East-West corridor. Where could you look and say there's proper sustainable development existing along the East-West corridor? And for example, and to go further, throughout Trinidad and Tobago, could anyone here identify anywhere in Trinidad where there is true, meaningful, sustainable development?
I can.
Yeah, yeah? No problem.
No, but that was rhetorical in a way.
We are in a situation of governments coming to power on terms that do not allow them to do anything else but satisfy promises that have been made to get them into power, unreasonable promises. And so I am sure, I think for almost all of 2010, this government had no interest in Point Fortin because it had a position against the highway. And there are people who had conversations with the government, but when the economy wasn't kicking up fast, when the problem of jobs were there, the highway was pulled off the shelf, dusted off, and this is the economic stimulus to take us back to the pre-2008. And so there is a level of desperation that gets in, and there's a whole momentum that pushes government. How do you break that momentum? Because I'm going to suggest that the next government is going to be in a similar situation. We do have to moral authority. We have to bring governments to office that have moral authority and legitimacy to have the space to ask hard things of the electorate. The electorate is the one that the governments are trying to satisfy, you know, when they do all these wild, crazy things, right? So, but how do you elect governments that could dare to ask you to buy local, to choose differently, to save foreign exchange? The only way they can do that is if in their own development, in your own throwing up of political parties, you engage those serious conversation about national development, so that that will not yield some 2x4 operation. This is something you are invested in, and you have to have that conversation. Now, somebody raised a question about consultation. When is the point that we could have been consulted about the highway? In a process from the ground up, a government will have to come and consult you about the highway. The highway would come out of your recognition that there is a need for a transportation system. And that conversation would have taken into consideration all those factors. But what we have got into now is a form of consultation that is not consultation, it's a ticking off of a box. And now people are trying to hide to have these public consultations so they can satisfy the EMA requirement or the IDB requirement and so on. And I think this is why Dr. Kubral Singh's operation has become a very disruptive force in that process, because the only way, this is what we are driven to in our impotence in the political system, the only way you can get attention to the media, to the politicians, to the government, is you have to go and make a set of noise. And that noise now is feeding the misinformation and disinformation. I think Dr. Kubral Singh has been as guilty in some ways of exacerbating the emotional tone. But I understand why. Because if you don't start to throw into the air things like people are going to die and this one will get cancer and so, the country is not listening to rational discussion, and it will not get, and so it has to be, again I come back to the commitment that we must all make and invest in rational discussion. Otherwise, that's what we're going to be locked into.
Winston? One short point that is necessary for us to understand. The highway is not intended to pass through the center of Debe and Pina. That you have, in other words, and two people mentioned that, what you have is the highway and ramp separated connection from these main towns onto highway. In terms of the highway, again, we have a concept. Because we have confusion in Trinidad where people drive off the highway on the side or from the house onto the highway. In fact, highways are not supposed to admit direct traffic. So that the final point, and I'm not going to make no more comments after this. I remember about 1984 going to a conference in Paris on roads and development. And there were a number of representatives of African countries. And those of you who know about the geography of Africa and know about the politics of Africa, one of the serious inhibiting factors that you don't have a meaningful AOU and you do not have economic development is the absence of a transport network in Africa. The same thing applies in South America. On the other hand, what I need to point out is the role that roads and rail played in the development of the United States of America. And that's all I'll say. Okay, we go.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I couldn't think of a better way to spend the morning. So I must thank you all, the panelists, for this. The first interesting point that came out of it came from Sunity this morning about the pursuit of power by politicians, and I couldn't agree with you more. So that the people of Trinidad and Tobago do really have to be very careful, and the political parties have to be careful about the screening of candidates. And I was going to say in both parties, and then I forgot that David was here. And I'm sure that he would be partaking in the elections. But certainly, the point about it is that we have to put the right people in office, people who are competent and capable of governance, of proper governance, and of course who have the capacity to implement and execute and who will act in the best interest of the development of Trinidad and Tobago. So I take your point about the pursuit of power in politics, and we saw evidence of that on Saturday night when the Prime Minister spoke with her followers, and the first point she made in her rankings was that we will lose power, and that's what she said to her followers, and there it is the evidence of what you said this morning. But with regard to the highway directly, I have to take the position, and you will well understand, that Point Fortin needs the highway and so on. And certainly the highway reroute movement has supported that. They do in fact support the highway to Point Fortin. I have overall concerns in that it has really become absolutely political. And pretty soon you're going to hear that, but you're hearing a lot of defense statements about this is for the south of Trinidad, etc. now. It's all political. And you're going to soon hear that it's going to start from Point Fortin, and there's this little piece that's going to be done between Point Fortin and Guapo. Quite frankly, I'm going to make a little bit of noise about that, contrary to my constituents, because that's going to be political in view of the fact there's a local government election coming up. And therefore, if you haven't solved the rest of the issues of the highway, that little piece, that little leg, a few meters from Point Fortin to Guapo, is simply going to be a highway to nowhere, and it's just going to satisfy political considerations and so on. But the point about it is this highway is extremely controversial, and it's reeked in maladministration from several points of view, and I think this is what the public must be concerned about. Number one, there are the environmental issues, and I totally support the fact that this consultation was adversely skewed. When you do consultation, it's supposed to be few members of government and several members of the persons who have an interest in it, so I really am pleased that we are moving forward in terms of dialogue. But there are concerns in terms of the delay, the total delay, the inordinate expenditure as well. We are highly over budget as well. There's concerns with the acquisition processes as well. We're now hearing about properties in David, residential properties that are worth $5 million and so on. That's impossible. And so that it's over budget, delayed, the expenditures are concerned, the accountabilities are concerned, the financing is a concern as well. It's impossible to you fund a project of $7 billion from the Treasury, and that is certainly to avoid transparency and accountability, and in that there are no questions to be answered. A $7 billion project, and there are no questions to say, okay, let's go back to base, this project is off already, let's review the project. There's no monitoring, there's no control in terms of expenditure as well. It is reeked with corruption, and I really have a concern as to what's the true purpose behind this and where are we really going with it.
Thank you very much for that.
I'd like
to address the question of advocacy, and to Ms. Maharaj, if you could give some feedback on that. Currently, there's a Facebook picture going around to young people with Dr. Kublai singing Subway with his wife eating, right? It may seem funny, but it's a message that we send into our young people that advocacy and standing up for your rights is funny, and it comes from madmen. And of course, last night on TV, Mr. Samar did make it made it a little more difficult to fight that. So therefore, do you think what happened with Dr. Kublai Singh would help to encourage advocacy, or do you think it would have a negative effect on future advocates in the country, young people?
Okay, good morning everyone. Tony Blackman, I'm here at SALISES. I like to come to these conferences because I think it's really important, and I'm always surprised that the rooms aren't filled and enough people aren't here to discuss their views, and so I'm sort of glad today it's sort of semi-full. One of the things I've been listening to, and I haven't heard a big explanation about, is vision. A country should have a vision for itself, and that includes the vision of the people of the country. This is a small country. 1.3 million people live in a small land space that's quite at risk for a lot of environmental issues, and we suffer from a lot of environmental problems due to transport. And I think one of the big issues here is transport, lack of proper infrastructure in the country. There are 1.3 million people and there are over 600,000 cars. Is that a problem for you? It's a problem for the environment, and I think it should be addressed. And I think when you just put that aside and say, oh, these are crazy voodoo, what did the honorable gentleman said, the voodoo environmentalists. No, environmentalists are not voodoo people. They have logical reasons for why they say what they say. And I think it's really important to pay attention to it, especially in a country like this. You should think about what just happened recently in New York City. And this is a country and a city that has a lot of resources. It's very important that we start to pay attention to this. Another thing that I think is very important is development. You can't take people out of this development. This is very important. It's a crucial part of development and a developing country. Institutions. One of the reasons I think that these people feel that they have no recourse and they have to go out into the streets and protest now is because they don't trust the institutions that currently exist, and they don't function properly. We don't have leaders that we trust, and they don't do what they say and say what they do. And I think we have to start from those kinds of discussions, and advocacy and people standing up for something is important in a democratic country. So I'll leave it there.
No, I'll be very short now, Dr. Watson. A pleasant morning, and I thanks for the opportunity to be in here today. Just a short question I'm asking pertaining to the cost of both highways, and I don't know if any of the panelists might be able to give an estimated cost, probably Mr. Boodhai can. But how much will it actually cost Trinidad and Tobago to complete or to build both highways? And with respect to the cost-benefit analysis, I'd like to know probably a little bit more about that. I know none was done, so probably just, and can Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time with the international economic downturn, can we afford whatever it will cost us?
Just to answer the last question, NIDCO's estimate is, I believe it's over 7.2 billion. Both entire projects, 7.2 billion. Maybe, we don't know. But that's the last figure that we got from NIDCO. They said construction cost is just over 5 billion, and additional cost with regards to acquisition and all these other things. I don't know what other factors they had to add an extra 2 billion to the highway project. So that's the entire cost. Just one point, we are not die hard against the construction of any highway, right? We are open to logical discussions, much of what came out in the media over the past year was as a result of frustration. This has been going on since 2006, and the people in the area have been trying to get their voices heard. They have written hundreds of letters to prime ministers, to ministers, to government officials to get our point heard. After years and years and years of promises and begging, we never got anything, any response. In fact, for example, this prime minister who campaigned on the election and said no highway, no byway, no way, right? When she came into power, we could have challenged the CEC, which was a flawed CEC. And we didn't, because they had so much trust in the MP who gave a promise to never build this highway, because he was chairman of the committee against this highway. And when they came into power, we didn't work to challenge the CEC because we thought they would have done as they promised. And they didn't. They reneged on their promise, and then a couple of years after, we found out that they're going full speed ahead with this highway. So all we wanted to do was get our points heard and a proper hydrological study of our concern, of cost-benefit analysis, and a feasibility analysis of this highway. Prove to us that this highway is feasible and it's going to meet the demands, the traffic congestion, the development of the people in Penal DB area. This doesn't have nothing to do with Point Fortin, because we support their highway. And we strongly urge the government to start the San Fernando to Point Fortin highway, start it immediately, right? And listen to our concern and come back to us with logic and with factual data supporting that they claim that this highway is totally necessary. Thank you.
I would hope that the experience would boost advocacy. I saw the same photograph and it's on Facebook, and it has evoked so much discussion. I am hoping that this is a case in which technology is working through all the confusions and all the erroneous things that go on Facebook, but it's activating people.